Peanuts, and welcome to anyone who's new to my channel or to this podcast. Now, this podcast covers true crime cases that may not be suitable for young listeners, so listener and viewer discretion is advised. Hi guys, I am back in my little reading nook. It is fabulous here. It's a really warm day in Melbourne, and when I say warm day, it's like 17 degrees Celsius. But for winter, that's actually not too bad. We've had a really nice day here. It's been a bit of a chaotic weekend, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, but I'm really excited because we are heading back to serial killer land. But just so you're all aware, I have 3 of my favorite listeners that I'm going to reach out to individually. My very first one will be my mum, because she is my biggest supporter. So I'm going to do an episode of true crime based on what she wants me to, and 2 other people who honestly are like the biggest supporters of my podcast. So you will see in the future, pretty near future, that I'm going to be doing a little bit of a segue away from certain things, but they will be dedicated to specific people when it comes to these episodes. So just so you're all aware. Today, we're delving into the Rhode Island Ripper. So obviously my state will be Rhode Island, and it was actually Jeffrey Melhot. He's born in 1970. He's raised in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. It's a small industrial city with a really tight-knit community. He would attend the local high school. He was described as really quiet and really introverted. There's actually not a lot available about whether he had disciplinary problems, any behavior issues. He just didn't stand out at all academically or socially. He really flew underneath the radar. Again, there's not a lot about his family background either. So there's no reports of any type of abuse, neglect. There's no sort of instability. This absence of the really early warning signs that we've seen before, it's actually describing them as a latent offender. Now, someone who harbours violent impulses beneath a mask of normalcy, only to act on them later in life. So we've seen this a couple of times in my podcast, guys, that we just see someone who is what we would describe as relatively normal, right? Like someone who is just your Tom, Dick or Harry in your local neighborhood. He didn't seem to have any of the same sort of, signs of, once again, he was normal, I would have gone home with him. And we're going to see, unfortunately, once again, the victims as sex workers. So just a warning to everybody, I get a little bit riled up with the fact that when we start talking about victimology and sometimes with the victims, because unfortunately, one of the biggest targets with most serial killers is sex workers. And it's because there is this undercurrent in society that we don't really give a crap about them. And it's not, I don't know if it's just your everyday person that doesn't give a crap about them, or it's just you are in a high-risk industry, so you should sort of be expected that this kind of thing is going to happen to you. I don't really understand it myself, but it is prevalent in a lot of our serial killer cases. But Jeffrey's ability to blend into his surroundings, and he would maintain this facade that he was really normal. It's probably one of the most chilling aspects, again, of his psychological profile. His crimes, they're committed between 2003 and 2004. It's not like a result of a sudden break or this descent into violence. He later confessed to murdering 3 women, dismembering their bodies in his bathtub, and he had actually been inspired to do this by an episode of The Sopranos. So after graduation, he remains in that small little town. He would work at the local paper mill, a job that he would end up holding for several years. He lived alone in a really modest apartment near downtown. This house, it's in the background, guys, in the video, so you'll definitely see it. It later became quite infamous because it's the site of all his murderous tendencies. His neighbours, his co-workers, they described him as polite, soft-spoken, and rather, the word that comes up the most is unremarkable. He had no known history of violence, no criminal record, no significant relationships that sort of raised those concerns, so no abusive domestic relationships. So it's this ordinary exterior that masks a really deep, disturbing interior. Again, guys, we've seen it all through my podcast, this ability to blend into the surroundings and, hide in plain sight. It's his ability to fly underneath the radar that probably is one of the most chilling aspects of any serial killers as far as I'm concerned. It's the Ted Bundys of the world. It's the BTKs of the world. It's even the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world. He didn't, despite a couple of times being involved in incidences with the police, he really still flew underneath the radar as well. It's the people and we watch horror movies, right? So we see like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we see Friday the 13th, we see Halloween. They're masked and they're disfigured and they're just ugly, and all these kind of components that in our minds we have this idea that is what a serial killer is. But what we've got to really focus on, guys, is this is not the case for serial killers. This is not the case for those victims. These victims go willingly because they don't see the fear in them. And I think that's probably always going to scare me the most when I'm watching like my true crime episodes and I'm watching these documentaries. And I've got a couple of ideas though after I finish my serial killers, just because I have been watching quite a few. And it's just, I really liked doing that episode about hidden in plain sight, because that is so prevalent in serial killers, but it's just prevalent everywhere. Like you hear so many times, he seemed so normal. He didn't seem like there was anything wrong. Yeah, it's great, guys. Well, it's not great, you know what I mean? So there's no obvious indicators of the brutality that actually existed underneath the surface. There's no reports of abuse. There's no trauma. There's no mental illness. So it's this absence of those warning signs that, again, he's called that latent offender. And it's that he's been harboring these fantasies for quite some time. So they're always underneath that surface, and he's having those violent fantasies that are one day going to accumulate into being outward. His was definitely one of the most brutal ways to do it. He murdered 3 women, each a sex worker. He was using a very methodical and horrifying pattern. So after he would lure his victims to his apartment, he would strangle them and he would dismember their bodies with a bow saw. It's apparently, I haven't seen this episode and I haven't watched Sopranos a lot to understand it, but this is where he got his idea on how to not get caught. But it's particularly disturbing is the stark contrast between what he had out in public and what he had in private. So that escalating behavior, there's no sort of cries for help. It was almost like an eruption, like a volcano just happened, and it was just what he described himself as an uncontrollable urge. So those fantasies just became too much for him. His story, though, is a really haunting reminder that evil resides in the most unsuspecting places. What I just talked about before, right? His ability to mask his violent tendencies, his, beneath a normal facade, it challenges our assumptions of what really danger should look like. So it also raises some really unsettling questions about the nature of latent pathology and the influence of sometimes media on pretty vulnerable minds. I'm not sure if that's the case with him, but, there is a case for that. So today, though, he remains incarcerated at the Rhode Island maximum security prison. He's serving 2 consecutive life sentences plus 10 years for his crimes. You've got to understand, though, this community itself in Rhode Island had never really seen violence like this ever. Like it was, and it's always in a town that has never suspected, of having such a violent offender. And I feel like that is often quite prevalent in some of our true crime documentaries as well. Like in a town like no other, it's boring. It doesn't do anything. Like it's day-to-day tasks. You see the local guy who makes your coffee in the morning, or you go to the local cafe or anything. It's always seems to be a little bit like in a town just like yours. But between 2003 and 2004, Jeffrey committed a series of brutal murders that would end up shocking this small little town of Woonsocket. His victims were local sex workers and women who sort of lived on the margins of society, and whose disappearance, once again, it drew really little media attention. But I have to say, I think there's stories once again deserve to be told, because this is about the victims, right, guys? Excuse me for just 1 second. I'm just going to take a sip of my water. Just 1 second. Not drinking soft drink or soda today. I'm drinking water. So our first victim today is Audrey L. Harris. She was 33 at the time of her murder. She's the first known victim. She was murdered in February 2003. She is a 33-year-old sex worker. She was actually picked up outside a laundromat. Once inside his apartment, he would strangle her almost immediately. So that urge took over straight away. Now, unsure of what he was meant to do next, he kept her body in the apartment for over a day. And that was when he had watched his episode of The Sopranos and he got the idea to go to the hardware store and get a bow saw. He used it to dismember her body in his bathtub. He would place her remains in garbage bags and disposed of them in dumpsters around the town and also other nearby towns. Her mum tirelessly would post heaps of missing persons flyers around the city, hoping for answers. Unfortunately, that would never come. And unfortunately for her mum, her remains have never been found because of the way he disposed of them. Now, our next victim, Christine Dumont, she's 42 years old. It would almost be a year later, so April 2004. He would go up to her sort of while she's out on the street, and he would follow that same sort of chilling pattern. He picked her up. He brought her back to his apartment, he strangled her, and he dismembered her body as well. And it's her remains, again, that were discarded around in dumpsters and have never been found as well. So her family has never had the ability to bury her and have that type of closure. Her life was marked by a lot of hardship. She was known, though, for her really quiet inner strength and her independence. And unfortunately, her disappearance would largely go unnoticed. Her remains have never been found, and her story really does. It reminds us and it serves as a painful reminder of how society often fails to protect those that are the most vulnerable. It shows, though, that his actions were not just impulsive, but they're calculating, and now they're becoming quite ritualistic. He's developed a method, and he is honing in on it, and he is going to try and perfect this. Now, the youngest known of his victims was Stacey. She was just 24 years old, and she was murdered about 3 months after Christine, so in July 2004. Now, she'd attended a 4th of July fireworks show just at the local park. He would lure her back to his apartment. Now, this is where he would repeat that same pattern. He would strangle her and he would dismember her. Her body parts were also discarded in dumpsters and never recovered. Now, all of these victims, their families have never been able to bury their own. It's just so fortunate and unfortunate in the same sentence that she would actually be the final murder. But it also underscores the randomness and cruelty of his crimes. He preyed on women who were truly just trying to survive what life had offered them. These women, Audrey, Christine, and Stacey, they're more than just victims. They're daughters, they're friends, and they're members of a community that unfortunately really failed to protect them. Their lives were cut short by a man who he really did hide his murderous nature, and while his crimes go unnoticed, it does come out, and the importance of visibility, justice, and remembrance. Now, in the summer, just after Stacey's murder, he's on the hunt for another victim. Now, by this time, it's sort of his plan starts to unravel because we've got 2 survivors, guys. We've got 2 of them. So on a June evening, perhaps it was before Stacey's murder. He picked up a 27-year-old by the name of Jocelyn Martel. She's a sex worker as well. He'd approached her outside the Thunder Mist Health Centre and offered her money for sex. Now, she agreed and accompanied him back to his apartment. Once inside, she asked, do you want to do this in the living room, the room? A question that is really going to mark an absolutely terrifying ordeal for her. As soon as she's turned her back, he's attacked her. He placed her in a chokehold and attempted to strangle her. But Jocelyn actually fought back with everything she had. And I have absolutely no doubt, by the way, that other victims did. But for whatever reason, she survived. She headbutted him, she poked him in the eye, and she would ultimately escape from him. Her courage and her really quick thinking is what saved her life. Now, soon after Stacey goes missing, detectives would actually get an anonymous tip, and that would lead them to Jocelyn. Now, they would find Jocelyn at a corrections institute. She'd actually been incarcerated on a probation violation relating to a drug charge. She would tell them about how she agreed to go to this man's apartment, who then attacked her. Now, one of the detectives that's leading this particular investigation is Lieutenant Edward Lee. He returns to the police headquarters, he checks those police records, and he finds an incident report by a lovely lady by the name of Tess Morris in a similar assault at the exact same residence. Now, both attacks happened sometime between the disappearance of Audrey Harris and Christine Demott. So, while Lee interviewed Morris, she would actually tell them about her incredible survival story. It was a struggle between this person and herself, and at first everything's really nice. Tess tells the police that she's happy to be with a cute guy for once. He's polite, he's talking to her, he's not treating her like, client, I guess. And then he just comes up straight behind her and he grabs her. Now, she can actually feel herself losing consciousness. She would engage in a really, really big life and death battle for her life. Now, she's kicking her attacker. She's kicking the kitchen table, the refrigerator. They end up in the bedroom and onto the bed. She tried to escape by kicking out a window until she finally got away. Now, she's pleading for her life. That's the way she described it. And then he just stopped. And he let her go. So it's incredible that she was able to sort of humanize herself, I'm guessing, but she would get away by jabbing her finger in his eye. Now, there was a third survivor, but she actually refused to come forward and she refused to file a complaint. But getting those statements about those attacks from those two women was exactly the break in the case that they needed. The detectives identified Jeffrey through utility bills and a picture of him from the Department of Motor Vehicles. So it's both Tess Morris and Jocelyn Martell that identified him in a picture and a lineup. We went to the survivors and said, this guy is playing choke. They go to get a search warrant and he's like, so detectives obtain a search warrant. They wait for Jeffrey to return home, and upon his arrest, he quickly broke down and actually confessed not to just the assaults, but also to the murders of Audrey, Christine, and Stacey. He would describe in some pretty graphic details about what he had done to each of the women and how he had dismembered them. And he would admit to the police on where he'd gotten his idea on how to do this. So it's almost become really, really common knowledge that this is what the Sopranos episode did. Pretty shocking, if you ask me. His arrest would come just 10 days after the murder of Stacey, and it would allow the police to recover her remains, apparently from a local landfill. There's contradictory information. There's some that say that the remains were found and some that weren't. But it was thanks to Jocelyn and Tess's bravery that they were able to stop this serial killer from going any further. It was their actions that not only saved their own lives, but likely a crap load more of murders. So they would become the key witnesses, and it would just, those brave women for coming forward and telling their story. I've got to tell you about this confession though. So after his arrest on July 17th in 2004, he would just confess everything. His confession was not only comprehensive, it's really emotionally raw, and it's really, really unsettling for these detectives. It's during his court appearance in Superior Court in Providence that he was actually visibly shaken, as the families would actually stand before him and the courts and deliver their impact statements. Apparently, he would break down in tears. He sobbed openly, his shoulders had hunched, and he listened to the grief and the anguish that he had actually caused himself. The courtroom felt, and this is what I've read, it felt incredibly heavy with emotion, and many observed the contrast between his remorseful demeanour and the cold and calculated nature of his crimes. So that's always probably going to throw me, because serial killers are often described as, the last thing they're described as empathetic. And that seems very empathetic of what? Unless he was faking it, which also is entirely possible. Jeffrey's lawyer, Robert B. Mann, he stood beside him through all of it while these proceedings are unfolding. He didn't attempt to deny the charges or deflect any type of responsibility. Instead, he actually allowed the confession to speak for itself, which was a really rare moment of transparency in a case marked with deception and horror. In his confession, though, he detailed out how he lured the women to his apartment, how he strangled them, and he later would admit how he disposed of their remains. He also revealed just everything about his violent fantasies and all of those components. So I'm wondering whether there was some part of him that actually did want to seek help, and maybe he was definitely disturbed, and I'm not going to take away from that. But the fact that he did seem to give it up so easily means that it was weighing heavy on him. But the confession's obviously the biggest turning point in the investigation, right? It's confirmed the suspicions of law enforcement, it's validated the accounts of those survivors, and it's provided closure to a certain degree for the families of the victims. So it still doesn't allow them to know where, like, their bodies are and give them a proper burial. So he's sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms plus 10 years, ensuring that he's never, ever going to walk again free. And he still to this day remains at the Rhode Island maximum security prison. I don't know if this is a form of justice. It does pose a couple of questions in my head. Was the remorse genuine, or was it just a reaction to him being caught? Did he feel guilt about the lives that he took? Because he certainly didn't seem to, by the calculated way in which he dismembered them. These questions for me are going to always linger a little bit. I like to believe in the good of people, so I do like to believe that potentially it was just not a great, time for him and all these fantasies, and hopefully he's getting the help that he does need. But there is certainly some components that I never really feel guilty when I see, like, 48 hours and all those kind of things, and these killers are crying, and I'm like, oh, you're only crying because you got caught. But his psychological profile, though, it's a bit of a paradox. He's not a man with any type of criminal history. He's described as quiet and polite, but he's got this other side of him that he murdered and dismembered 3 women. So again, it's a really, really big one. So we've seen it with Robert Batora. We've seen it public persona and what we see. It's really, really interesting. So we're going to delve a little bit into the latent pathology and the control components. So his crimes were not impulsive at all, but they're full of rage and also very calculated in its ritual. He would strangle his victims really swiftly. He dismembered their bodies with bow saws and he disposed of them. So it suggests a certain need for control and detachment from that emotional consequence. So his confession would also reveal that he enjoyed trapping his victims, a statement that points to a psychological compulsion. It's rooted in domination and manipulation. We've seen it a lot. Despite his remorseful tone during interrogation, his behaviour does indicate a deeper pathology. So it's the absence of the prior offences that suggests his violent urges may have been quite suppressed for quite some time. And it was only surfaced when triggered by a specific stimuli, it's some type of circumstance in his life. But this definitely aligns with the psychological theories about latent offenders. So individuals that harbour violent fantasies but maintain a normalcy outside, like their public persona. There's also his emotional detachment and his ritualization. His methodical approach to strangulation, his dismemberment and disposal suggests a bit of a ritualistic pattern that may have provided him with a sense of just release from whatever he was feeling. Now, it's the repetition of this process across those 3 murders that indicates a compulsion rather than chaos. So his ability to carry out these acts without detection for almost a year, it also points to some very high levels of emotional detachment and cognitive control. Whilst it's very, very much, I could go down a pathway of just continuing to talk about this, at the end of the day, though, these impacts in the community, it would leave a really deep scar for this. Just one moment, guys. I'm so sorry. My door's open and my kitty cats want to go outside. So just give me one sec. Sorry. My little Meg girl decided that she wanted to come inside and she opens the door up herself. She's a little tricky one. So getting back to the community impact. So it's going to leave a really big, deep impact on this small community. His victims, while they're sex workers, their disappearances would lead to limited attention. So it's calling out the community and it's calling out the actions of the police to maybe you need to think about these victims and about the vulnerability of the marginalized women and the systematic failures that allowed these murders to go unnoticed for almost a year. It was frightening to some of the residents in this community as well that this polite and quiet gentleman was able to commit such egregious acts. It's one of those things that we see it so many times with serial killers that they are able to kill undetected. Is it now? This is another one, right? This is going to throw me, and I'm going to get some controversy, I think. Was it the use of this particular Sopranos episode that triggered him to go out and kill? Or was it the fact that he had that underlying, disturbing behavior, and this just sort of gave him an ability to bring it out, and it was a quick and easy fix for him to get out of what he had done? So I don't know when there's such conflicting information that he watched the episode before he killed, and then there's the one where he didn't. So if he'd watched the episode beforehand, then I'm guessing that some of that violent tendencies already existed and this just gave it a trigger point. Or if he'd murdered her and it just gave him a way out. So that's my personal belief. Now, though only one set of remains has ever been recovered, the families of the victims, they do really cry out for advocacy of justice. Specifically, Audrey Harris's mum, she posted missing flyers throughout Woonsocket, refusing to let her daughter's disappearance go unnoticed. So it's these acts that we need to look out for, right, guys? We need to make sure that if we're seeing these missing posters, go and look, see who these victims are. You've also got to consider the survivors, right? Perhaps some of the most powerful legacies out of this is Jocelyn Martel and Tess Morris, who had the courage to actually come forward and make a police report on this man, because it shows a story and it's a testament to resilience, and it shows the critical role that these survivors of these serial killers, they need to be found. So I'm hoping it inspires in some way, shape or form that if they do, sex workers do get attacked, come forward. You are going to be heard. And I really do hope that it does inspire someone to go, maybe I will be heard. Maybe this time my story will actually be heard. But these victims, we need to remember them. We need to remember Audrey Harris. We need to remember Christine DuPont. And we need to remember the Stacys of the world. Because at the end of the day, it's about them and what they went through. And they endured this Rhode Island Ripper, and their families are left with a giant hole in their lives. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you like this episode, please hit that like button. If you like my podcast, subscribe. Go back and watch my little mini series that I do 5 different episodes on different topics of true crime. Or if you like serial killers, I do a serial killer from each of the states of the United States. I hope you all have a fabulous weekend, my fellow peanuts. See you later, guys. Bye.